who you gonna call?
Who you gonna call?
Who you gonna call?
Who you gonna call was a catchphrase heard everywhere during the 1980s, and it was the signature for the Ghostbusters. Fresh from the success of the 1984 movie only 2 years prior, the proton pack wielding heroes transitioned from big screen to small screen with the Real Ghostbusters, and continued the adventures of Egon Spengler, Ray Stantz, Winston Zeddemore, and Peter Venkman as the New York paranormal investigators as they protect New York City from ghosts, spooks, and goblins. Gideon Melnitz and Slammer are all intact from the movie, but there is no Dana Barrett or Louis Tully, although Louis does appear in later seasons. Not to be confused with Filmations Ghostbusters, which was based on the 1975 live-action comedy TV show. Now, there is some history here behind both these animated shows, so here we go. When Columbia Pictures started producing the film Ghostbusters in 1984, it neglected the fact that Filmation had already produced a live-action comedy series with that same name in 1975. Columbia agreed to license the name from Filmation for around $608,000 plus 1% of the profits. The deal, however, did not include giving Filmation the rights to make an animated series based on the film. After the 84 movie became a phenomenal worldwide success, Filmation offered to make an animated series, but Columbia Pictures chose to give the contract to DIC. Filmation then decided to make their own animated show based on their 1975 live-action sitcom, but in comparison, it did very poorly to the Real Ghostbusters in terms of TV ratings and action figure sales. Lou Scheimer, the producer of Filmation and the brains behind He-Man and Masters of the Universe, then admitted to making an error in judgment by running his version of Ghostbusters alongside the Real Ghostbusters. And just to make things just a little bit more interesting, both shows were launched in the fall of 1986, with Filmation releasing their version on September the 8th, and then Real Ghostbusters 5 days later on September 13th. Isn't history amazing? And just to mention briefly, I watched Filmation's version as a kid, and I thought it was absolute garbage, not comparing at all to the Real Ghostbusters. Now back to the real deal, pun intended. The whole feel and ambience of the show has a spooky, slightly edgy feel to it, which made it just a little bit scary for me as a young child. One of its biggest selling points is the background music that plays constantly throughout the series. It can range from ominous and frightening to funky, loud and exciting, giving it that 80s vibe which was so prevalent with animated shows and TV in general during those times. The show wasn't really heavy on the violence, but it had an action-packed vibe which made for a lively presentation. The ghosts and spooks that appeared on the show had a variety of different and unique looks, with some of them just more scary and gruesome looking. Like this one, for instance. It looks so much like the terror dogs from the 84 movie. But I will get into the different types of ghosts a bit later on. The very first episode I remember watching was The Bird of Kildarby. When an ancient Irish castle is moved to New York, it is inhabited with the ghostly spirits who cause mass disruptions, interrupting the mayor's speech. The Ghostbusters are called in. Peter, being the wise guy, takes on the ghost solo, and then later regrets it and tries to escape while fending them off. But eventually he is captured. The other three blast their way in and eventually negotiate for his release. The Ghostbusters make a wager with the ghosts, defeat their wee pet birdie, and they will leave the castle. Fail, and everyone in Manhattan will have to leave the island forever. This wee pet, if you will, is a massive and frightening looking killer bird, and it sets off after the Ghostbusters who escape with Ecto 1 and drive back to headquarters. They set up a massive trap and have to fend off the bird before blasting and capturing it. Now the ghosts partially agree to their bargain as they stay put in the castle, but won't harm anyone during the day. However, they will continue to play their bagpipe music after sundown. Now after over 30 years, this episode is still quite fresh in the memory. It appeared that Peter was the leader of the group in this episode, but in other shows each of the Ghostbusters take turns in leading, so there wasn't a definitive leader in the show as compared to the movie. I did mention that the tone of the show was slightly edgy, but it took its cue from the movie, and it had its moments of comedy and occasional campiness, with Peter usually the butt of the jokes, especially as it involved him bickering with Slimer. Now the Ghostbusters themselves. Peter Venkman, probably the unofficial spokesperson for the group with his wisecracks and dry sense of humour. Ray Stantz, the inventor and most enthusiastic member of the group. Winston Zeddemore, the cool, calm, relaxed member of the group. And Egon Spengler, the scientist and brains. Part of the 1-2 combo with Ray as he designs all the equipment, whilst Ray makes them. Gideon Melnitz's the secretary for the Ghostbusters. She is like a direct rip from the movie with her sassy, sarcastic personality. And she also has the hearts for Egon. It must be those glasses. And then you have Slimer, who started out as a tag-along, but becomes like a sidekick or a pet for the group. Ray takes him like a big brother, whilst Peter can't stand him, and he constantly gets slimed. Though over time, Peter does take to Slimer in his own way. What makes these characters even more special are the voice actors behind them. Famed actor and talk show host Arsenio Hall plays the voice of Winston, and he does it so effortlessly that it looks like an animated caricature of Hall himself. Now, a little history lesson here. Ernie Hudson, who played Winston in the movie, actually auditioned for the role of Winston for the animated show as well. Now imagine another timeline if that did take place. Ernie Hudson could have voiced both versions of Winston Zeddemore, and that would have been an interesting take. However, not as interesting as the voice behind Peter Venkman. Fans of the Ghostbusters will know that the late great Lorenzo Music voiced Venkman for a time on the Real Ghostbusters. Music was more popularly known as the voice of Garfield, and you just can't help but think Garfield every time Venkman speaks.
Yeah, I wonder what we forgot.
Why didn't you mention this earlier?
Music left the show around season 3 and was replaced by Dave Coulier, who sounded a lot closer to Bill Murray than Music ever did.
No, but if they're anywhere around, we can spot them from up here.
Oh, I get it. Oh, very cute.
And just to add to the Venkman-Garfield dynamic, Bill Murray went on to voice Garfield in the live-action movie starring Breckin Meyer and Jennifer Love Hewitt, going full circle, which started with Music's portrayal of Venkman, after he voiced Garfield. Egon Spengler is voiced by one of the all-time greats in voice acting, Maurice LaMarche, with a CV that very few voice actors can match. Among his characters, of course, is the Brain from Pinky and the Brain. He captures the essence of Egon's character from his awkwardness to his geekiness, and even sounds like him a bit. And finally, there is the voice behind Ray Stantz, the iconic and legendary voice god Frank Welker. Frank is without a doubt the undisputed king of voice actors, with a career that goes all the way back to the late 1960s. Any animated show you watched as a kid, or a teenager, or even an adult, from the 1970s to the 2020s, you more than likely would have heard Frank's dulcet tones. Just check out his IMDb page, it is just crazy. And finally, we had Laura Summers, the voice of Janine. She sounds like she's doing an impression of Annie Potts, and a very good one at that. Although Laura says that it was really her own mother that she was basing the voice on.
When I was doing Janine, I remembered Annie Potts, but I wasn't doing an impression of her because I'd only seen it once. So I really, my mom is from Brooklyn, and I really just sort of did her and my spin on it.
Just to finish off this section, I did mention Lorenzo Music leaving the show. Well, so did Arsenio Hall and Laura Summer, and they were replaced by Buster Jones and Kathy Soucie. Buster was fine, but he wasn't Hall, and at times he came off as bland and uncharismatic.
Beats me. Egon was picking up a big PKE reading before they vanished. But wherever they went, it's beyond the range of these walkie-talkies.
Kathy Soucie gave Janine a more toned down and simplified version of the character. No longer was she loud and charismatic and had that it quality that made the character. She was more motherly and nice, I felt. And that hurt the character, I think, because it just wasn't the same portrayal whatsoever. It wasn't the same at all.
This is the old Janine, and this is the new Janine. You'll note it's not just the face that's changed. Her voice has changed as well. Remember how she used to talk with that really annoying Brooklyn accent?
Okay, lowbrows. I'll prove you wrong about this lamp. Just watch.
Really? Hey! Okay, that's it. I am taking the rest of the day off. I'll talk to you later, Monica. Always playing games.
Now, the show's episodes, looking back in retrospect, had a good mix of humor, edginess, and mini horror. Some episodes I found a little ponderous and boring, and others gave off a sense of excitement. Two particular episodes I remember enjoying were Ragnarok and Roll and Knock Knock. In Ragnarok and Roll, a man named Jeremy sets loose the forces of evil with a magic flute to bring about the end of the world. Jeremy's ex-girlfriend and his best friend Titilio convince him to stop, but not before Jeremy is almost destroyed by the evil ghost Ragnarok, as the Ghostbusters come to his aid and help drive away the evil spirit, and Jeremy is able to restore what he tried to destroy. And in the episode Knock Knock, some subway workers accidentally open the dimensional door, sending a never-ending stream of poltergeists on the city. And if not stopped, the whole world will be replaced by these demonic creatures, bringing about doomsday. Now, both these episodes both ran at the standard time for a standard episode. They both had a massive feeling of impending doom and felt epic in scope when you compare it to other episodes. Now, if they had done an animated movie, these two episodes could have served as the blueprint, in my opinion. In terms of the actual ghosts, there were many garish and frightening looking ghosts, and some, quite frankly, maybe just a little bit too terrifying for an animated show that was mostly aimed at kids. The most memorable ghost for me had to be the Boogeyman. As a kid, you would always hear stories about the Boogeyman coming for you, and he was hiding under the bed, waiting to strike. Well, in this show, the Boogeyman was very much the real deal. He wasn't a typical ghost like the others, he was more of a manifestation of children's fear, which Egon himself had experienced when he was a kid, as he too was tortured by the Boogeyman. From his appearance to his voice, which was done by Frank Welker, it was a very odd, a very spooky, and a very spectacular looking villain. Now, the Ghostbusters went on for 7 seasons, which I was surprised to learn. You see, growing up in Nigeria at a time when there was no internet, there were no Blu-rays, live streaming, or even DVDs, I had to rely on VHS tapes, which were recordings of the show whenever myself or my family travelled abroad, and we were recording them directly from the TV, so I had no idea what order the seasons or the episodes themselves were coming out. The show ended in 1991, but it was still in heavy syndication across the US and the UK. Over time, I managed to collect the full set and watch most of the show, with just a few episodes left from the later seasons that I need to catch up on. Ghostbusters was a tale of 2 seasons, with the first 3 being primarily focused on the Ghostbusters and the content, whilst being geared towards a younger audience. It still contained a few things considered by networks at the time inappropriate, like Gideon's short skimpy outfits and the frightening nature of some of the ghosts. Seasons 4 to 7 of the show was retitled Slimer and the Real Ghostbusters, which on top of the regular episode also included a number of short episodes that added up to half an hour, with Slimer being the primary focus. The show had also been toned down and was even more kid-friendly, and at times quite campy. The tone and ambience wasn't as edgy as the first 3 seasons, and with Lorenzo Music, Laura Summer and Arsenio Hall all gone, the characters that they had portrayed felt different. The newbies didn't quite bring the same gravitas with their voices to the characters that their predecessors did. So whenever I watch the show, the later seasons I tend to stay away from. Now, with that said, the show overall was a fun watch, especially with the first 2 seasons. At times it felt like a continuation of the 84 movie, and has callbacks of sorts, like when in the episode Citizen's Ghost there is a flashback, and the name Gozer is mentioned, and it takes place shortly after the events of the 1984 movie. And of course there is the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, who makes a few appearances on the show. It is clearly an 80s show by its look and its feel, but I'd say that it holds up fairly well when you compare it to today's modern cartoons. The stories are well written, and the voice acting is quite good, and it doesn't feel too cartoony or overly campy. unlike a lot of other 80s cartoon shows that were on at the same time. If they were to do a modern reboot, they could definitely draw on this show and the first two movies for its inspiration. I'd say it could look something like an updated version of the Men in Black animated show that we caught in the late 90s. Final thoughts on the show? Well, at times when I rewatched, there are some episodes which I find kind of boring, but there are several episodes that I do enjoy, and it has a level of quality that in some regards keeps the show from aging and keeps it holding up fairly well. The action is not fast and furious per se, but there's a lot of suspense and a feeling of dread that help the show be more entertaining. The voice acting is well done and brings the characters to life. A classic piece of animation history that adds to the great legacy of the Ghostbusters.